So I wanted to talk this morning. We talked a week or so ago about anger, managing anger, turning anger into compassion. And that's just one manifestation, anger, of emotional reactivity, which we talk about and have talked about here in the past. And one of the basic tenets, one of the basic guideposts of this practice is that we need to manage our emotions skillfully, or at least as skillfully as possible, to achieve equanimity and to have some peace in our lives. And that comes from, as we talk about all the time, among other things, accepting things as they are. So we label this unskillful tendency to be controlled by our emotions, to sort of be battered around by the winds that hit us, as reactivity. It's just a catch-all term. But when we are reactive, we typically find that our emotions are not skillful, that we're not making the best decisions. Hi, Doris. Dolores. And I define one major type of dukkha is reactivity. And that hopefully will become clear as we get more into it in a minute. But reactivity is a tremendous source of suffering. Our mind is not at ease when we're in reactive mode. Okay, and this reactivity, which is just sort of being controlled by our emotions, as I said, it has multiple manifestations. It can be individual. I can be reactive within myself. I can be consumed with self-criticism, with shame, with guilt. It can be relational. It can involve conflict with others, anger at others, resentments. It can be larger and collective and social, us versus them, othering, they're bad, we're good kind of thing. But the bottom line is the common denominator is all of these lead to greater suffering. But the good news is that with our practice, we have choices, we have agency. The Buddha talked about the four foundations of mindfulness in the sort of the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the sort of foundational teaching. And I'm only going to talk about Citta today. It's spelled C-I-T-T-A in the Pali. And that's the third of the four foundations of mindfulness. And it roughly translates to thoughts or mind or mental states. And Citta can be either healthy and skillful or unskillful. Okay, and when Citta is unskillful, the Buddha talked about this unskillful mindset which becomes contracted, meaning kind of tightened down, unworkable. It can become distracted, where we're sort of preoccupied with something. We talked about rumination a few weeks ago. That can be a form of unskillful Citta. It can be, it can involve inflation. It can involve a sense of grandiosity and how special and separate and wonderful I am. But Citta can also involve lots of good qualities of heart and mind. It can also involve, the positive mental states. So it's not in itself good or bad. It just describes that mental tendency. And again, you won't be surprised to hear me say that the path to working with Citta, to doing it successfully, is with noticing, pausing, and discernment. Okay, we have to pay attention to what's going on in terms of the things that are triggering our emotional reactivity. And the challenge for us is to see how and when the mind and the heart, and remember, the Buddha sort of used mind and heart as one concept, sort of inseparable. And there he's talking about really that sort of false dichotomy between our heart being sort of the feeling, the emotional tone, and our thoughts. I mean, he sort of saw them as one thing, as heart mind. You'll often hear that term in Buddhist teachings. But the challenge for us is to see how and when the mind heart are contracted and we get hooked. That is where reactivity occurs. Okay. And reactivity sometimes is referred to in the Buddhist literature as bondage. We become prisoner to it. In its absence is described as freedom. I mean, we can look at it as bondage versus freedom on a continuum. Because when we're feeling the freedom from not being a prisoner to our reactivity, there's an openness, there's a spaciousness, there's an awareness, okay? And the teaching, which I think best illustrates this from the Buddhas, from the Pali Canon, is our old friend, the parable of the two arrows. The first arrow is that unavoidable thing of the realities of life, loss, disappointment, failure, inconvenience, all the things that happen to us. But the reactivity, the dukkha, is the second arrow in the Salatha Sutta. Okay, and I just want to read a quote from the canon where the Buddha is said to have talked about it in this way. He says, when touched with a feeling of pain, the uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person sorrows, grieves, and laments, beats his chest, and becomes distraught. So he feels two pains, physical and mental. Just as if they were to shoot a man with an arrow, and right afterwards shoot him with another arrow, so that he would feel the pain of two arrows. In the same way, when touched with a feeling of pain, the uninstructed run-of-the-mill person sorrow, grieves, and laments, beats his chest, and becomes distraught. So he feels two pains, physical and mental. So there's the wonderful parable of the second arrow, which we talk about so much. But reflexively responding to our emotions without thinking, shooting from the hip, often involves a lot of second arrow stuff. Excuse me. And there are endless examples of this, snapping at someone, flying off the handle, beating myself up, lashing out, angrily withdrawing into silence, speaking unskillfully, being short-tempered, using self-protective mechanisms that further isolate us, on and on and on. I mean, any kind of unskillful emotional response, and we all have them. We spend our lives dealing with them. I'm not saying we can be rid of them. All I'm suggesting is we can learn to manage them more skillfully. So how does this happen? I mean, how do we develop this reactivity? Well, there's many pathways. It's a very complicated puzzle. But I'm going to talk about this more on Saturday. But emotionally, we are hardwired through evolution to have a capacity for reactivity. Okay, there's a survival component. There's a protective component. There's those things which underlie most of the hardwired emotions. But it doesn't mean we have to be prisoners of it. We have choices. Often reactivity comes from those social forces that encourage craving and clinging to the idea that things should be different than they are. Okay, very often reactivity is a function of, gosh, I think it should be this way. Reality tells me, or is telling me different. That upsets me, makes me reactive, makes me want to lash out or whatever. Often it develops from early causes and conditions which are unconscious. Okay, sometimes there's wounds that we carry about belonging, about being validated, about intimacy, about autonomy, about security. All of our psychology can be ripe ground for reactivity. Sorry. But our task is to approach this with an open awareness and with a non-judgmental, emphasize that, non-judgmental recognition of what our internal experience is. And this is hard because we live our lives so much on autopilot with this stuff outside of our conscious awareness. We're not really tuned into it. And as often is said here, one way to tune into it is to go to the body. What am I feeling? Where am I feeling? What's arising? What's arising in my midsection? What's that tightness in my solar plexus? What's going on? As children, responses from parents and siblings and peers and caretakers, all that can influence our tendency toward reactivity. And we learn, just because we're not so conscious and aware as children, to react immediately, not thinking, not understanding, not processing our feelings. Remember, Reactivity, where it comes from parts of the brain that are survival based, so it comes online very quickly. Noticing and discernment takes a little longer. The cerebral cortex takes a little longer to come online. So it's a challenge to pause and give it time, the cerebral cortex, our higher processes, to come online. So what do we do? I mean, how do we approach this? It seems like such a big task, and it is. We set an intention to pay attention, to notice. We want to learn the difference between responding and reacting. Responding involves discernment, delay, thoughtfulness, and so forth. Reacting, I'm shooting from the hip. I shoot first, I ask questions later. Now, I say again and again here that what hinders us, what gets in our way and what trips us up is a path to awakening. That's like a red flag in front of me saying, you need to pay attention to this, you need to work on this. This is a landmine for you. Your reactivity is out of control, because we don't awaken if things are too easy or not causing us suffering. Remember, the suffering's like that toothache. It gets our attention. It says, whoa, your behavior's a little over the top here. You just snapped at your best friend. What the heck's going on here? Okay. And if I'm reflective, I will invariably find that it's coming from some painful feeling or experience inside. Okay. And I have to accept that. I have to accept it and not react to it. Okay. Because feelings that are fully felt in the body, mindfully held, can be surmounted with wisdom and then let go. It's a huge order, but it's part of the practice. We set an intention to work on it. Because the true nature of this path, of this spiritual path, is accepting the true nature of reality. And that's how we learn to live our lives from an awakened heart and mind, and the freedom that comes with it. It's well worth the time and effort that we put into it. And boy, does it improve the quality of our lives. Does it improve the quality of our relationships? Does it bring, less need to justify our actions after the fact? Well, I was a jerk because you made me be one, that kind of stuff. Well, I'm a master of that. So anyway, it really reaps the rewards. So I want to close with a quote from this author, Sarah Noffke, which I love, and she says, quote, "I don't run from my worries. I invite each one into my heart and mind. At the doorstep of my emotional threshold, I greet them like a perfect host. Each worry tracks mud into my home and dirties the furniture. I grit and bear my house guests. Their time with me will be short-lived." Close quotes. So she's talking about welcoming this stuff, bearing it, and knowing that it's impermanent. So reactivity. Let's explore that together. Let me just stop the recording.